My name's Todd. I'm an overcomer.
Hey, Todd.
So to fill in those blanks for you real quick, my name is Todd. I am 37. I'm from Haverty Grace, Maryland, which is a small town just north of Baltimore.
Oh, wait, that's it, stop. I didn't know you was from north of the Mason-Dixon.
I am south of the Mason-Dixon. Thank you very much. I am south of the Mason-Dixon.
Okay.
Just south of Philly, just north of Baltimore. I am the oldest child of 6. They're all half siblings. None of us grew up together except I grew up with one sister. I was raised by my mother, my grandmother, and a stepfather. I didn't know my real dad until I was 10. He passed away in 2017. I'm the father of 4, 2 girls, 2 boys. I'm a retired police dispatcher, firefighter, and EMT. I'm a former captain in the EMS. I'm also a retired taxi driver. I am a recovering alcoholic and addict. I have 7.5 months, almost 8 months now, clean. And I'm going to start off by painting you a little picture of about 7.5 months ago. I was 37, still 37. 37 years old, nothing to show for it. No home, no job, no car, no family. $20 in my pocket, overdrawn bank account to my name. The only thing I owned was stuffed in a bag between my knees and the seat in front of me in an airplane. This hulking figure was shoved in the middle seat of a jet taxiing down the runway at Philadelphia Airport. I'd never flown before in my life, and I was absolutely terrified. As the pilot powered up the engines for takeoff, my breath caught in my throat, a little yelp passed my lips, and I started crying. I lowered my sunglasses so nobody could see this giant grown man crying in a jet taxiing down the runway. I was on my way here to southern Georgia to a long-term drug and alcohol rehab facility known as Turning Point. I was coming off a 5-month bender, most of which I don't even have any memories of. But apparently I did enough damage to cause every single person I knew and loved to turn their back on me. And while I was doing that, I also garnered interest from a lot of interest from local law enforcement. Though I wouldn't learn about that until after some time I spent in rehab. As the plane reached altitude and leveled off, I took a deep shuddering breath and started to think about how I got there. My chemical dependency started when I was a junior in high school. At the age of 16, a friend of mine brought some speed pills, Adderall I think it was, I'm not quite sure, I don't remember, and an empty cologne bottle full of alcohol, I don't even remember what kind it was, to Smoker's Corner at the high school, and offered me some. So of course, I took a healthy dose of each. I'd had alcohol before. My stepfather was a practicing alcoholic my entire childhood, and he never cared if I snuck a drink of his beer. In fact, when I was 2, my uncles on my mother's side thought it was funny to teach me how to use the tap on the keg at the beer keg at their parties so I could fetch them beers. They thought it was hilarious. And my mom didn't think it was too funny when she came home and found me at 2 years old laying under the tap with it lying full blast. So apparently my allergy presented itself at a very young age. So after those first pills and that fatal swig on the corner before school, it quickly became a daily occurrence. I was excellent at hiding it. I always had gum on me to mask the smell on my breath. I knew exactly where my threshold was so that I could pop pills and drink and not be out of character. I had special hiding places I built into my car. I had a 92 Plymouth Acclaim that I had all kinds of modifications to. The ignition was broke, so I just put a push button start on it. You had to turn the key and then push the button and it would start. It had a beige interior and a blue seat. But I had all kinds of little hiding places built into the seat and into the trunk where I would hide my booze and my pills and everything. So sneaking around to partake was easy. And I had lots of freedom when I was a kid. And upperclassmen friends with fake IDs and little to no scruples meant my supplies never ran dry, especially when I was their personal taxi. So the irony of the situation was that as my dependency was manifesting itself, my stepfather's recovery was just beginning. He was a drop-dead drunk up until I turned 16. Then out of nowhere, he disappeared one day. Come to find out, he was entering a rehab, a very well-known rehab. And he came out of the rehab and started living the sober life and was doing a very good job of it, while I started living the unsober life and was doing a very good job at it. And we were along for the ride whether we wanted to or not. So we had to go to meetings to support him. So there were many days I was pressured into going to an AA meeting, grudgingly so, where I would get to the parking lot of the AA meeting, get tipsy, toasty in the parking lot, and then go drink stale coffee and listen to all these drunks pat themselves on the back if they put the bottle down. I didn't belong there. I wasn't an alcoholic. I was cool. I was a rebel. I didn't have a problem. I had a hobby. So I did that until it was time to go to college. College and I got along wonderfully. The alcohol and the drugs flowed freely. And I did my part to consume as much of my share as I possibly could. Often more than my share. Somehow I managed to juggle a full class schedule, a part-time campus security job, a full-time 911 dispatcher job, and become a volunteer firefighter. All while drinking and popping pills and smoking weed every day. The drinking and drugging rarely interfered with my regular schedule until I let everything become too much and wound up extremely drunk, literally standing on a soapbox in front of my apartment at 2 o'clock in the morning, very loudly preaching to anyone within earshot. I had no idea what my sermon was about at that time, but it was a very loud sermon, and it's been lost to time, but my audience ended up being the officers I worked with at the police department. And unbeknownst to me at the time, the guest of honor was the chief of police, who was standing around the corner in the bushes. So it made for an awkward conference in his office the next morning. We gingerly discussed the previous night's performance over coffee, and trying to decide how to handle this underage member of the police department, obviously drunk an escapade the night before. So he took pity on me and agreed that we would forget the whole incident if I swore to sobriety that night until I was of age, which of course I immediately agreed to do. And we shook hands, I left his office, got in the car, and cracked a beer. Drove home. So I somehow managed to keep my dependency quiet and keep my job until I left school and returned home. So I scaled things back a little bit, entered adulthood, full adulthood. I ended up having to leave school because I ran out of money, but never got a degree from that college. My addiction never went away. The drinking and pill usage was a daily occurrence. I eventually met a woman, had a child, got married, started 2 simultaneous careers. All the while, the dependency remained like a close friend, only I had to keep it hidden from the world. I managed to add some legitimacy to my addiction by getting myself diagnosed with anxiety. So all of a sudden, boom, now my doctor was my dealer. So not a day went by when I didn't have a drink, take a couple of pills, but I never saw myself as having a problem. I wasn't stumbling home drunk every night like my stepfather. He was the alcoholic. I was just calming my nerves. I was fine until I woke up in the hospital. Christmas Eve 2009, I overdosed on benzos and alcohol. And thank God my preteen daughter was there to come to my rescue. She called 911 because I was home alone with the kids. And she was there to save my life. I woke up in the ICU at the local hospital, passed back out, and then woke up in a locked mental ward. I was very lucky to be alive. I was able to convince them it was a misunderstanding, that it was an accidental overdose, that I didn't have a problem, I wasn't suicidal, that I had just changed prescriptions and accidentally had taken too much. They bought it and they let me go. However, that was the beginning of my slow descent into hell. Everything began to fall apart. Because of the overdose, I lost my job as a dispatcher. At this time, I was an EMT and a captain with the local EMS company. I was asked not to run for re-election. My marriage quickly fell apart and ended in an extremely messy divorce. I started another job as a car salesman, and my drinking started to interfere with that. And for the first time, it started to interfere with my day-to-day life. Instead of just enough to take the edge off, now it was just enough so I could still walk. I started missing days at work. My kids started making excuses to stop staying with me, to avoid me. My behavior became more and more erratic. And then finally, shortly after my birthday in August of 2010, I found myself back in the ICU of the hospital, this time from a intentional overdose. And I had made the intentions clear this time. On top of that, my ex-wife now had a court order giving her full custody of the kids and requiring supervised visitation if I wanted to get anywhere near them. I was devastated. But I still didn't have a problem. So I stumbled my way out of the hospital and heavily medicated, because they thought medication was the problem, would help me too. Within an hour I had a drink, but I made sure nobody knew it. I worked on picking myself up and dusting myself off. I was homeless, childless, penniless, and hopeless. My mother took pity on me and let me move in with her. I fought to get my kids back, which I did. I licked my wounds and started over, but I never stopped drinking. I never stopped taking pills. But now I saw it as being medically compliant, as being responsible. I was still a member of the local EMS company, but I was disgraced now. But I held my head up and I threw myself into volunteering. Soon after that, I met my second wife. Our courtship lasted an entire month before we got married. We moved in together before the wedding, and we were very happy, but still I drank. I just hid it from her. I drank in celebration now. I celebrated a bit too much, a bit too often. I worked my way through our finances, paying for my pills and my drinking, but I had to creatively hide it. So here I was, less than a year married, and my new bride and I are now homeless and broke because of my spending. Once again, my mother took pity on me, allowed us to move in with her again. It was not an ideal arrangement. Her house was tiny, and she had recently inherited my children from my ex-wife. So we were all living together in an extremely small house. I was thrilled to be with my kids again, but no one was happy. So I finally got my act together, got my wife and I out of there, and took my kids with me. Right around this time, I hurt myself working as an EMT, and though I had never admitted it before, it was because I was taking benzos while I was working as an EMT. I decided I no longer could work and that I qualified for disability. So while I was in constant pain, life and hiding my dependency quickly got a whole lot easier. So for the next 5 years, under the being disabled, I coasted through being dutiful father, husband, loyal churchgoer, scout leader, all-around good citizen, all while hiding my alcoholism and benzo dependence from everyone I met. I even managed to get a degree from Liberty University, Associates in Religion, during this time. I did such a good job of hiding it, I thought I could add opiates to the mix without anybody noticing. My wife suffered from crippling pain and fibromyalgia and was in pain management, but didn't like being on so many pain pills. So I started sneaking pills from her, and it was pretty easy. I got bored sitting at home, so I took a part-time job as a supervisor with a taxi company. Now I had disposable income on top of a habit. And dispose of it I did. With all the prescription pills I could get my hands on. So once again, my behavior became extremely erratic. I was mixing daily alcohol use with benzos and opiates on top of a serious bipolar illness, which only led to disaster. I was sneaking to the city, doing things I shouldn't have been doing, and it was eventually discovered, and my marriage imploding like a building being demolished. My wife left, my addictions worsened, and the kids started spending more and more time with their mother, who had recently moved back to the area. With nothing to temper my indulgences, I started dating a recovering addict as a rebound for my wife. and we quickly went down a rabbit hole together. It was not pretty. We ended up, what started out as alcohol and pills ended up with crack and heroin. I lost my job. I lost all my positions in the community. I retreated into the darkness of my addiction. I ignored my family and my kids. I sold everything I owned. I hid all my problems as best I could. I blamed everything on stress and my girlfriend's addiction. I even went so far as to have her arrested for stealing from me because her addiction had gotten so bad. I blamed everything on her. During this time, I met another woman whose relationship would be so toxic to me that it almost killed me. During this relationship, I managed to kick the heroin and the crack on November 1st, 2016. And I even tempered the alcohol once or twice a week. But I replaced the heroin with Suboxone, which I heavily abused, and the benzos never stopped. Now, I said I ended the opioid addiction and tempered the alcohol consumption. However, I replaced these with the relationship. This relationship almost killed me. To the point that I can't even really talk about it, honestly. I'm going to skim through it and hit the high points. Long story short, I told her I was going to kill myself, told her how I was going to do it, exactly what I was doing, and that I had done it. She waited 12 hours before she told anybody I was doing it, and let me lie there to die before she sent any help. And when I got out of the hospital from that suicide attempt, I went right back to her. So, but I finally extricated myself from that relationship in the spring of 2017, and I met an amazing new woman whose name is Ada. And we immediately clicked.
When are you gonna bring her to a meeting?
She had a 3-month-old daughter that I adopted as my own almost immediately. We knew right away we were meant to be together. However, I had to fight my demons first. With her help and support, I quit drinking completely, and she helped me wean myself off of my Suboxone addiction. I deluded myself into thinking that the benzos and the Adderalls that I had been on for the past 20-some years were not an addiction but a necessity. I was able to maintain that for about a year. Then my father died pretty rapidly from cancer. Not long after that, the woman that I'd been in that toxic relationship was murdered. I felt a lot of guilt about that. My drug use ramped up pretty quickly, but in secret. Then in the spring of 2018, everything started spinning rapidly out of control. My psychiatric medication stopped working, and I had a psychotic break. Our relationship suffered greatly. I suffered a huge economic setback, and I spiraled into oblivion. I neglected her, I neglected our daughter, our home, everything. She could no longer handle things on her own, and she was forced to make an extremely hard decision. Faced with the prospect of having to now raise our daughter completely by herself, and with her sobriety and our daughter's well-being and safety hanging in the balance, she made the decision for family members to adopt her. At the time, I couldn't understand her decision, and I ended up committing myself to a mental health facility for evaluation. Of course, their solution was to increase the benzos and the Adderall. Our relationship did not recover from my spiral, and not knowing how to handle things, I fled and abandoned her. Something I am ashamed of to this day. I fled in an attempt to try to find myself, and all I found was trouble. Once I fled, everything completely fell apart. I lost our home. I lost our vehicles. I was so sick I didn't care anymore. I met up with an ex who happened to also be an addict. We rationalized ourselves into using. We started with just a little bit of crack every couple days, just to keep ourselves from going back to the hard stuff. That quickly spiraled into what ended up being over a $100 a day habit each. My only income is disability, so I had to do many things to support my habit I'm not proud of. I stole from family. I sold things that weren't mine. a lot of other things. I don't remember 99% of what I did in order to support our habit, and I really need to try to find out what I did so I can make amends for it. But I was completely off the chain. But I was running back and forth between Newark, Delaware, and Aberdeen, Maryland, just completely out of control. Finally, I broke down one day, sitting in a motel room. Checkout was 11. About 10 o'clock, I started making phone calls to rehab facilities, trying to find somewhere to go, because I had had enough. I was done. I couldn't do it anymore. And I finally got a hold of some place called the Whitsitt Center in Chestertown, Maryland. And they told me that with my insurance, Medicaid, the only place that was going to accept me was Turning Point in Georgia. So they gave me Turning Point's number, and I had to leave the motel room because I was out of money. So I got in my car and I drove to a park and ride on 95 in Aberdeen. And I sat in that park and ride and called Turning Point. And I still remember that conversation. I spoke to, her name was Carrie. And I sat there and I cried to her. And that was the first time ever in my life that I had admitted that I was a drug addict and the extent of my problem. And I did my first step right there in that parking lot. And I bawled to her like a baby. Just admitted everything. And she said, look, we can't get you down here right now. We need a couple days to get a bed. Find yourself a detox. Check yourself in. We'll make arrangements to get you down here. We'll fly you down here. So I got on the phone and started calling places. I called every single detox in the state of Maryland. Nobody would take me. They either couldn't detox me off of what I was trying to come off of, because I had started taking methadone again, because I didn't want to go back on the opiates. And nobody could detox me. And at this point, I had gotten completely away from God. I had completely abandoned God because I thought God had abandoned me. But I just started praying again. I didn't even know who I was praying to. I was just praying to pray to whoever would listen. Please, somebody help me. And I went to an NA meeting, and it was horrible. I walked out of that NA meeting, and all I wanted to do was use again. And then something told me that I needed to go to Denny's. I wasn't even hungry. I didn't have any money. I wasn't hungry. But something told me to go to the Denny's. And I pulled into the Denny's parking lot. And as I'm sitting there, a family friend of mine pulls up. And her daughter had been through addiction. And she saw me standing there, and she knew what I'd been going through. And she came up to me and started talking to me. And asked how I was, what was going on, what I needed. She took me inside and bought me something to eat, because I hadn't eaten in days. Bought me dinner. She started calling detoxes for me. They finally found a detox in Wilmington, Delaware that would take me. And gave me the number to the detox place. And made me swear I would go there first thing in the morning, because I couldn't do intake that night. The next morning I went to the detox in Wilmington, checked in, and slept for like 3 days. And that was God. That was 100% God. God told me to go to Denny's. God put Rena there that night. God put her there that night. And I stayed there for a couple days. It was not the nicest place in the world, but I got what I needed. I went and checked into the hospital for a couple days because I had a real bad respiratory infection. They took care of me for a couple days, coordinated with Turning Point, got me down here. I took my free will back and went back out the night before again. Went and did something I shouldn't have done again. But I went the next morning, drove to Philadelphia Airport, had to abandon my car at Philadelphia Airport parking lot. It's now property of Philadelphia Airport Parking Authority. They auctioned that off. But I remember getting on the plane, and like I said, when I first got on the plane, I was terrified. But the second plane I got on, I got a window seat in a front open aisle by myself. And I got to look out the window. And as that plane took off, I looked out that window and I reconnected with God. I had the first of many spiritual awakenings that day. My higher power reached out and touched me that day. And I knew I was going to be all right. I knew I was going to make it. And it's been one God thing after another ever since. I reconnected with Ada. It took time. It took a lot of work and trust. But I made it through Turning Point. We got our own place. She came down and joined me. We've been going to meeting after meeting after meeting, working our programs, and just God's been working in our life. We've been blessed. You know, I came down here with $20 in my pocket. I don't have $20 in my pocket now, but I'm rich in so many other ways.
You got a belly full of beans.
That's right, I got a belly full of beans right now. I'm rich in so many other ways. God has put so many people in my
You got another car.
I got a car.
Amen.
Thanks.
Bunch of friends.
A huge amount of friends.
Good church.
More friends that I can count. An amazing church. Meetings that I can go to. People I can talk to whenever I need. I'm more blessed than I've ever been in my life. And the blessings keep coming in every day.
Amen.
And that's if that's not God, I don't know what is.
Amen.
So, but that's a little bit of my testimony. Thanks for letting me share.